The sun dipped low over the ruined skyline of Ridgewater City, casting a crimson hue across crumbled buildings and streets littered with abandoned cars and silent corpses. For 3 weeks, the city had belonged to the flesh-eaters, grotesque, decaying monsters born from a viral outbreak no one could explain, only survive. Inside the steel and glass shell of the old municipal sports complex, 70 survivors huddled together, their breath held tight in collective tension. What was once a buzzing arena for local basketball games had now become their final stronghold, reinforced with welded doors, fortified walls, and watchpoints carved out of press boxes and lighting rigs. Among them was Elena Ramirez, a former paramedic turned de facto medic for the group. She moved through the injured, checking bandages and offering weak smiles to calm the children. Her hands were steady, but her eyes, once warm and reassuring, had become hollow with loss. Her husband and son had never made it to the complex. At the entrance, Malik Green, a retired Marine and now the group's security lead, scanned the city through broken binoculars. He had scars from both war and the recent apocalypse, and his voice carried the kind of authority that people obeyed without question. He'd kept them alive this long. But even he knew their time was running out. Food was low. Ammunition even lower. And the generators keeping the intersections lit were running on fumes. Worse yet, the zombies, once slow and staggered, had begun moving in coordinated packs. They learned. They adapted. And now, they surrounded the complex. A meeting was called in the central hallway, the floor still bearing faded three-point lines and paint scuffs. Makeshift lights hummed overhead. 70 of us left, Malik said, standing tall, his voice gravelly. That's not a number to mourn, that's a number to win with. But we've got 2 days of food, a few dozen bullets, and we're sitting in a fishbowl. He gestured to the crowd, scanning faces hardened by suffering. Which means we don't wait for them to come to us. Gasps rippled. One man, an electrician named Toby, stepped forward. You're talking about fighting them out there? You've seen what they do to people. I have, Malik said. And I'd rather die fighting than starve in a corner. Elena stepped forward next, her voice calm but resolute. We can't survive here much longer. But if we're moving, we need to think smart. Map out a route. Get supplies. Maybe even get to that old military depot 5 miles west. A murmur of hope. Whispers of a place with weapons, medical supplies, and heavy vehicles. That depot might be our only shot, Malik nodded. But we'll need to move in squads. Fast. Quiet. Armed. Plans formed like embers catching flame. The survivors began splitting into specialized teams, scouts, medics, defenders, and haulers. The youngest, kids barely into their teens, were taught how to reload weapons and make emergency bandages. Even the elderly found purpose, organizing rations, boiling water, reinforcing barricades. One name carried hope through them all, the 70. They were no longer just people hiding. They were fighters. Later that night, Malik stood atop the arena's rooftop with Danny, a former high school track star turned scout. She pointed through the scope of her rifle toward a darkened street 2 blocks down. There's movement near the gas station. Dozens of them. But they're not feeding, they're circling. Like they're guarding something, Malik muttered. Danny nodded. There might be something they don't want us to see. Malik tightened his jaw. Or something we need. The next morning brought gray skies and a heavy wind. Perfect cover. The first squad, 8 survivors led by Malik and Danny, moved out under the cloak of dawn. They wore homemade armor crafted from sports gear and carried blades alongside rifles to conserve ammo. Their target, the gas station. Back at the complex, Elena prepped the infirmary for potential wounded while Toby and others readied a backup power system in case the main generators failed. Every ticking second felt like a loaded gun to the head. By noon, gunfire echoed in the distance. By nightfall, only 6 of the 8 returned. Danny carried a wounded man on her back. Malik's face was bloodied, but his eyes burned with something fierce. They were guarding it, he told the group as they rushed to help. A crate of fuel cans. Canned food. Radios. Not coincidence. Someone's using them, controlling them. Gasps filled the air. They're not just walking corpses anymore, Malik growled. They're being led. And just like that, hope became fear again. But not defeat. The 70 would adapt too. They would fight back, together. The survivors gathered around the radio. Malik recovered from the gas station, the soft crackle filling the room with anxious silence. Toby sat cross-legged on the ground, trying to clean and patch the old device. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of possibility. If the radio worked, it could mean contact. If it didn't, it was just another dead end. Elena crouched nearby, checking the injured man from the previous raid, Vince, a former firefighter who had taken a bite to the shoulder during the retrieval. The wound was deep but clean. No signs of fever. Not yet. We shouldn't take chances, whispered Ava, a nurse who had lost 3 of her siblings in the first week. He was bitten. You know what that means. Elena's jaw clenched. It doesn't always turn people. Not immediately. We isolate him, monitor. But we don't execute someone who fought to save us. The argument sparked tension through the group. Whispers turned into low debates. Suspicion stirred like smoke, choking out trust. Meanwhile, Malik and Danny huddled over a hand-drawn map. Using information from the raid, they sketched out where they believed the supplies had come from, a warehouse to the east, on the edge of industrial Ridgewater. It was far, but it lined up with another critical clue, fresh tire marks outside the gas station. Humans. Organized. Armed. There's someone out there controlling the infected, Malik said quietly. Or at least directing them like pawns. No way those creatures naturally guard supply caches. Danny nodded. Maybe it's ex-military. Or some lunatic with a god complex. Either way, we need eyes on them. A recon squad was formed. Small, fast, and silent, Danny would lead, taking 2 volunteers with her. The mission, find the warehouse, confirm who was there, and get out. No engagements unless necessary. That night, while the others reinforced barricades and watched over Vince in quarantine, Danny and her team slipped out through the maintenance tunnels beneath the stadium. Malik watched them vanish into the shadows, unsure if he'd ever see her again. Back inside, tension simmered. People were growing restless. The noise from the zombies outside was rising each night, like they could sense the survivors weren't just prey, but a threat. Elena sat beside Vince, who was pale and barely conscious. She dabbed his forehead with a damp cloth. Hang on, she whispered. Just hang on. Then suddenly, the radio sputtered. Everyone froze. Toby leaned in, adjusting the dials. If anyone can hear this. Do not approach the Southern Highway. Repeat, the Southern Highway is compromised. They're organizing, they're being herded. The voice was male, panicked, distant. There was static, a burst of interference, then silence. Toby looked up, his face pale. Did you hear that? Herded? Malik's expression darkened. We're not the only ones noticing changes. At dawn, chaos struck. Vince had turned. Elena had gone to check on him and found him hunched over Ava's lifeless body, blood dripping from his chin. He snarled and lunged. Her scream brought others running. Malik and 3 others fought to restrain him, but it was too late for Ava. Her throat was gone. They put Vince down, fast and brutal. The emotional toll hit hard. No one said it aloud, but every pair of eyes screamed the same thought: we're not safe even from each other. Trust was crumbling. That night, Malik called a meeting. No more mistakes, he said coldly. Anyone bitten goes into lockdown. No exceptions. Some agreed. Others glared at Elena, who still bore Vince's blood on her shirt. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Hours later, Danny's team returned, breathless, scraped, but alive. They'd found the warehouse. What they reported chilled the survivors to their core. There were trucks, military, Danny said. And guards. Real ones. With gear, rifles, comms. And the zombies, someone asked. They were chained. Caged. Like dogs. They're using them, testing them, maybe. Why? Malik growled. Danny met his gaze. They're planning something. This isn't just survival anymore. Someone's preparing for a war. Gasps echoed across the group. For days, the survivors had clung to the belief that the world had descended into chaos. Now, it seemed some people were thriving in it. The 70 had survived this long by hiding and defending. But if they were going to make it, they'd have to do something they never expected. Go on the offensive. The morning air was thick with tension. The recon team's report had confirmed the survivors' worst fears. Somewhere beyond the walls, an organized human force was controlling the undead. And worse, they were preparing for something far larger than anyone could comprehend. Malik stood in front of the survivors, maps spread out before him. Every face in the room looked to him for direction. No longer just a marine or protector, he had become the commander of the 70. Here's the deal, he said. That warehouse is a threat. They're experimenting. Controlling the infected. And they're not far, 4 miles east. If we wait, they come to us. If we move first, maybe we catch them off guard. A chorus of murmurs erupted. Some were ready to strike. Others were terrified of provoking the group that could leash monsters like dogs. We don't even know how many are there, said a man named Rory, a former taxi driver. What if it's a trap? What if they're luring us out? Then we spring the trap on our terms, Danny shot back. We don't sit here like bait. We strike first, scout deeper, learn who they are. The survivors voted. The decision was tight, but clear. They would send a larger team this time. A strike team of 10, split into 2 units. Malik and Danny would lead. The objective, gather intelligence, disable any communication lines, and if possible, retrieve weapons or supplies. The rest would hold the arena. Elena stayed behind, still shaken from the loss of Ava and Vince, but more determined than ever. She helped train a rotating watch on how to treat infections and made sure the wounded were secured and monitored closely. By noon, the strike team was ready. They moved like shadows through the streets, past shattered glass and burned-out storefronts, every step echoing in the dead silence of Ridgewater. Occasionally, a lone zombie would stumble into view, but they dispatched them silently, with blades or steel pipes. Gunfire was a last resort. It wasn't long before they saw the warehouse. It sat on the edge of an old industrial park, surrounded by fencing and guarded by men in full tactical gear. Beyond the fence, the team spotted makeshift cages holding at least 20 undead, some writhing in hunger, others just standing still, like they were waiting. Inside, they saw generators. Trucks. Large containers marked with hazard signs. And, most disturbing of all, a small crowd of people, not guards, not prisoners, just watching. Test subjects, Malik whispered. Or recruits. They're building something, Danny said. Something they're proud of. They watched as 2 guards wheeled out a zombie on a steel platform. A man in a lab coat approached, injected something into the creature's neck, and within seconds, the zombie's behavior shifted. It stopped snarling. Its breathing slowed. Sedated? Malik asked. No, Danny said, lowering her binoculars. Controlled. They had seen enough. But as they turned to leave, something snapped under Malik's boot, a fragment of broken glass. The guard closest to them turned sharply. Go! Malik hissed. The team scattered. Gunshots rang out. Danny and 2 others took cover behind an overturned delivery van. Malik and his crew ducked into an alleyway. The warehouse compound exploded into action, alarms blaring, floodlights cutting through the gray sky. The chase was brutal. 2 members of the team were cornered and taken down before they even reached the outer perimeter. Malik watched it happen, helpless, fists clenched. They ran for nearly a mile before losing the tail. Bleeding, breathless, the remaining 7 stumbled into a gutted cafe and collapsed behind shattered counters. "We lost Charlie and Priya," Danny said through gritted teeth. "And we're not going back empty-handed," Malik replied. He pulled a black tablet from his vest. "Grab this off one of the crates near the control station. Could be their plans, schedules, routes, anything." They limped back to the arena under cover of night, dragging their wounded and grief behind them. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the room fell silent as the rest realized how few had returned. Toby took the tablet. "Give me an hour. I'll see what's on it." Malik turned to the group. "We've got confirmation, they're experimenting. They're building an army of infected they can control. They don't want to rebuild the world, they want to rule it." And so the 70 began to understand the true scale of what they were up against. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was war. The survivors gathered in the central hall of the arena. The lights flickered on and off, a harsh reminder of their dwindling resources. The air was thick with unease as the group waited for Toby to decode the data from the tablet. Malik stood at the front, his arms crossed, his mind racing with the implications of their failed recon mission. 2 of their own had been lost, and their plan to infiltrate the warehouse had failed. They needed answers. And fast. Toby's voice broke the silence. "Got something," he muttered, his eyes glued to the tablet's screen. He tapped furiously, swiping through files and images. "What is it?" Danny asked, her voice sharp with impatience. "It's a list," Toby said, pointing to a string of names and locations on the screen. "These are coordinates. Places all over the country. They're collecting people. Not just zombies, but survivors, too." Malik frowned. "Why would they need survivors?" Toby scrolled through more files. "There's more. It looks like they've been testing the infected's adaptability, the ones they're controlling. They're using the survivors as test subjects." A sickening silence fell over the group. The notion that people were being captured and experimented on by whoever controlled the infected made the air feel even colder. "They're not just surviving," Danny said, her voice tight with anger. "They're creating something. They want to weaponize the undead. That's why the zombies were chained and caged," Malik muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They're trying to build an army. They don't want the world back, they want to dominate it." Elena stepped forward, her voice softer but no less determined. "We've known all along that there are worse things than the undead, and now we know who's making them worse." Malik turned to her. "You're right. We need to stop them before they get any closer to their goal. This isn't just about surviving anymore. This is about fighting back and winning." The survivors nodded in agreement, their faces set with a grim determination. But the question remained, how could they stop an army of undead under the control of these unknown figures? Toby continued scrolling through the files, his eyes narrowing. "There's a location here, it's marked as Alpha. It's the main facility, the headquarters. If we go there, we might be able to find out who's behind this, maybe even shut it all down." Malik looked at the map, his mind turning the idea over. "If we can get to Alpha, we can take out their operations. But it won't be easy. We're not just up against zombies anymore, we're up against a well-organized force." Danny crossed her arms. "We've got people who know how to fight. We've got supplies, and we've got each other. If we hit them hard, we can take this facility. We can put an end to it." But not everyone was convinced. Rory, the former taxi driver, stepped forward. "What happens if we go to Alpha and find out it's a trap? What if it's a setup to wipe out the last of us?" "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it," Malik replied. "But sitting here and waiting isn't an option anymore." The group fell into a tense silence. Every survivor knew the stakes were higher now. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for the future of the world. After a long moment, Malik spoke again. "All right, here's the plan. We move out at dawn. We'll split into 2 teams. Team 1 will go for the facility. Team 2 will stay here, defending the perimeter. If we're not back within 48 hours, Team 2 goes in after us." The survivors nodded. They knew what needed to be done. There was no turning back. As the teams prepared for the mission, Elena found herself in the infirmary, staring at Vince's grave. She hadn't let herself grieve for him, not yet. There was no time for that. But the guilt lingered like a shadow. "He would have wanted us to keep fighting," she whispered to the wind. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The survivors gathered in the arena, weapons in hand, ready for whatever came next. Toby passed out the last of the ammo. Malik gave one final speech, rallying the group with the promise that they would fight for a world worth living in, a world free of the people who had turned the undead into instruments of war. The door to the arena creaked open, and the 70 stepped into the streets of Ridgewater once again. As they moved through the crumbling city, the sense of urgency was palpable. They had no illusions left. They were outnumbered, underprepared, and running out of time. But they would do whatever it took. They would face the enemy head-on. And they would fight back. Let me know when you're ready for part 5, or if you'd like to continue with the full outline for all 8 parts. The sun barely peeked over the horizon when Malik and his team began their dangerous trek toward Alpha. The air was thick with the scent of decay, but there was no turning back now. The survivors were committed, the clock was ticking, and they had to act quickly before the people behind the undead could complete whatever plans they had in mind. Malik, Danny, and 6 others moved swiftly through the ruins of the city, keeping to back alleys and abandoned buildings where the dead were less likely to wander. Every creak of a floorboard, every snap of a twig, sent their senses into overdrive. The world outside the arena felt different now, the silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. "Do you think it's a trap?" asked Matt, a former paramedic, as he scanned the horizon, his eyes alert. "I think we're past the point of wondering," Malik replied. "We don't have time to second-guess. We hit hard, hit fast, and pray we're not too late." The team moved silently, following the route they had mapped out. The path to Alpha was fraught with obstacles, abandoned vehicles, overturned barricades, and signs of the undead's constant hunger. The more they traveled, the more they realized the sheer scale of the destruction. The world they once knew was gone, replaced by an all-consuming nightmare. As they neared the outskirts of the facility, Malik signaled for them to halt. They crouched behind a tall, rusted fence, observing the area. Alpha was surrounded by a high concrete wall, reinforced with barbed wire and patrolled by guards who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Several military vehicles were stationed near the entrance, their engines idling. Danny was the first to speak. "They're expecting us. Look at the patrols. They've got eyes everywhere." Malik's brow furrowed. "We need to find a way in without alerting them. If we go in guns blazing, we're dead before we even get close." They waited, watching for a gap in the patrols. The guards were thorough, but there was a rhythm to their movements. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They just needed one chance, one opening. "Here," whispered Claire, the youngest member of the group, pointing to a narrow tunnel beneath the wall. It was barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through, but it was their only chance. "All right," Malik said, his voice steady. "We move fast. Get in, get out. If anything goes wrong, we regroup at the rendezvous point." One by one, they crawled through the tunnel, slipping into the facility's shadowed underbelly. The air was stale, filled with the scent of mildew and oil. The inside of Alpha was a labyrinth of metal corridors and low-ceilinged rooms. The sound of distant machines hummed in the background, mixing with the faint growls of the undead locked in cages deeper within the facility. Danny led the group down a narrow hallway, her hand tightly gripping her rifle. "We need to find the control room. It'll have everything we need to shut this down." They moved quickly, ducking into empty rooms when they heard footsteps or voices. The facility was eerily quiet, like the calm before the storm. Malik's heart raced as they made their way deeper into the building. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something, or someone, was always a step ahead of them. Suddenly, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. "Hide!" Malik hissed. The group dove into nearby closets and behind crates, holding their breath. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, growing louder. The guards were close. Too close. One of the guards passed by the closet where Claire was hiding. She could feel her pulse in her throat, every breath a potential giveaway. The guard stopped, just a few feet away from her. She barely dared to move, afraid even the slightest sound would betray her. The guard turned away, continuing down the hallway. Claire exhaled slowly, her body shaking with the adrenaline rush. "We need to move, now," Danny whispered. They didn't wait long. The moment the guard passed, they were on the move again, slipping through the halls like ghosts, their footsteps light but hurried. The control room was just ahead. When they reached the door, Malik signaled for them to stop. The door was guarded by 2 soldiers, their rifles resting against the wall. But there was a crack in the door, just wide enough for Danny to peer through. Inside, she saw the control room, a jumble of monitors, blinking lights, and a team of scientists huddled around a central terminal. On one of the screens, a live feed showed the cages filled with the undead. "They're watching us," Danny said softly. "They know we're here." "We go in loud, take out the guards, and get to the terminal," Malik decided, his voice firm. "We have one shot at this." With no more time to waste, they moved into position. Danny and Claire took one guard, while Malik and Matt took the other. The fight was swift but intense, the guards barely had time to react before they were disarmed and restrained. Malik kicked open the door to the control room, sending it crashing against the wall. "Everyone on the ground," he shouted. The scientists froze. One of them raised their hands, visibly terrified. "We don't want trouble," the man stammered. "We're just following orders." "Who's behind this?" Malik demanded. "Who's controlling the undead?" The man hesitated, fear in his eyes. It's General Klein. He's the one pulling the strings. He wants to control everything." Malik's heart sank. General Klein, the man they'd heard about in rumors, the one who had been using the zombies as pawns in his twisted game. "We need to take him down," Malik muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Once we do, we end this madness." The room was filled with tension, but the first piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. With the control room secured and the scientists neutralized, the team quickly set to work on the terminal. Toby, who had remained outside to provide cover, connected his device to the mainframe, his hands flying over the keyboard. The whole building seemed to pulse with a strange, sickening energy, the faint growls of the undead echoing through the air vents. Come on, Toby muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. "We need to shut this whole thing down. If Klein's running the show, it's worse than we thought." Malik paced nervously, his eyes constantly flicking to the door. "How long until you get through?" "Shouldn't be much longer, just need to break the encryption." "Whoever built this place really didn't want anyone snooping around," Toby grumbled. Danny crouched near the window, keeping watch over the hallway. "We need to move fast. Klein's probably got more soldiers close by. If he's the one behind all of this, he won't hesitate to send reinforcements." Elena joined her, glancing down at the corridor where the sound of distant footsteps had begun to echo. "Why is Klein doing this?" Elena whispered, almost as if the question didn't need an answer. "What's the endgame?" "Power," Malik said, his voice dark. "A man who can control the dead has more power than anyone on this earth. He wants to reshape the world in his image, to reign over a population that can't fight back. Zombies are his soldiers, his weapon. And once he's done here, he'll move on to the next city." They heard the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open down the hallway. "Too late," Danny hissed. "Move!" Malik barked, drawing his weapon as he signaled for everyone to take cover. The door to the control room was blasted open with a deafening crack. Armed soldiers poured into the room, weapons raised. At their head was a tall figure, General Klein. His cold eyes locked onto Malik, the corners of his lips curling into a cruel smile. I knew you would make it this far, Klein said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. But you should have known better than to come here. This is my world now. You're just living in it, for now. Malik didn't flinch. This ends today, Klein. We're taking you down. Oh, I think you misunderstand, Klein replied, his smile widening. This has already ended. You're just too slow to realize it. At a signal from Klein, the soldiers advanced, but before they could get any closer, Toby shouted, I've got it. The room's lights flickered, and Toby's device sent a burst of static through the air. Klein's smug expression faltered for just a second. The terminal screen flashed, then went dark. The systems controlling the undead suddenly froze, the hum of the facility silencing. Klein's face twisted with rage. You think you've won? You're all dead already. You just don't know it yet. Without warning, the floor beneath them seemed to tremble. The faint growls of zombies grew louder, echoing through the walls, until they were practically deafening. Klein's eyes gleamed with twisted satisfaction. The moment you stepped into this facility, you sealed your fate. You've triggered the countdown, and now, this place is going to be your tomb. Move out. Malik shouted, his voice urgent. The survivors grabbed their weapons, pushing through the panic as the doors to the control room slammed shut. Toby's device had given them the advantage, but Klein's threat wasn't over. The facility was rigged, not just with traps, but with hordes of undead that Klein had been preparing for the moment of his ascension. As the team rushed toward the exit, the walls shook again, and a massive screech echoed through the building. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The sound of thousands of infected pounding against the facility's walls could be heard. Get to the rendezvous point. Malik shouted. Don't stop for anything. But the zombies weren't the only danger now. The facility's internal security had come online, locking down all exits. Steel doors slammed shut, trapping them inside with only one way out, the deepest, most secure level of the building. Malik knew it wasn't a choice anymore, it was a race to survive, and the odds were stacked against them. What now? Danny asked, her voice tense. We go down, Malik said, motioning toward the only unsealed door at the far end of the hall. As they ran, the first of the undead breached the hallway. Their twisted bodies slithered out from the rooms, their eyes blank, their moans filling the space. Klein had unleashed them. He had known exactly what would happen once they tried to shut down the facility. The survivors fought back, cutting through the zombies with precision, but there were too many. For every zombie they took down, 2 more appeared. It was like fighting an unending tide. They needed to escape, but the way forward was blocked. The doors to the lower levels were sealed tight, but there was one thing they hadn't considered, the maintenance shaft. The only way down was through the bowels of the building, and it would be their last hope. Malik slammed his shoulder into the maintenance door, forcing it open. We take the underground. It's our only chance. The maintenance door creaked open, and Malik motioned for everyone to hurry. The shaft before them was dark and narrow, lit only by the faint glow of emergency lights. The air was thick with dust, the smell of rust and mildew mixing with the metallic scent of blood. Go, go, go! Malik urged, his voice low but filled with urgency. The survivors filed into the shaft, one by one, barely able to move in the cramped space. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in on them as they descended, each step echoing ominously. The sound of the undead clawing their way through the facility above them grew distant but no less terrifying. Every so often, they would hear a distant scream or a crash, and their hearts would race, knowing that the horrors they had left behind were closing in. I hope this tunnel leads somewhere, Danny muttered, glancing nervously behind her. It has to, Malik said grimly. We don't have much time. We've got to get to the lower levels, find the main control room, and destroy everything. If we don't, Klein's plans will go ahead, and we'll be dead before morning. They continued to move downward, the shaft growing even darker as they progressed. The sound of dripping water filled the space, and every few steps, they had to dodge around broken pipes or jagged edges of rusted metal. The survivors' clothes clung to them, heavy with sweat and grime from the intensity of their fight. Elena, the quietest of the group, spoke up. If Klein's planning on taking control of more cities, we need to stop him before it gets worse. How do we even know what he's capable of? Malik paused for a moment, his eyes glancing at the others, then forward into the darkness ahead. We don't, he said. But what we do know is that if we don't stop him now, he'll have the entire world in his grip. If we don't get this done, all of this, he motioned to the chaos and destruction above them, it'll be just the beginning. Danny pushed forward, determined. We'll make it. We're not the first to face down impossible odds. And we won't be the last. They reached the bottom of the maintenance shaft with a thud, and the survivors spilled into an enormous underground room, the dim light barely illuminating their surroundings. The room was littered with discarded equipment, rusty tools, and abandoned crates. But there was something more, something unsettling about the place. A low hum filled the air, and the group instantly froze. Malik motioned for everyone to be quiet, his hand raised in a silent command. The sound was coming from somewhere deeper within the facility, like the hum of a massive machine coming to life. What is that? Claire whispered, her eyes wide. I don't know, Malik said, his voice grim. But we're about to find out. They moved cautiously through the room, every step slow and deliberate. As they crept further into the depths of the underground complex, they saw it, a massive control center, hidden beneath layers of thick concrete. This was where the heart of Klein's operation resided. On the far side of the room was a large steel door, sealed tight with complex security measures. But what lay beyond it was even more disturbing, rows of cages, all containing zombies in various stages of mutation. The creatures were chained, some still fully human in appearance, others horribly deformed. Klein had been experimenting on them, using them as living weapons for his twisted vision of control. We need to get in there, Malik said, his voice low but determined. That's where the main controls are located. It's where we can shut everything down. Toby, who had been silent for most of the journey, suddenly spoke up. There's no way we're getting through that door without Klein knowing. It's too well guarded. We don't need to go through the door, Malik said, glancing around the room. We just need to be creative. He spotted a ventilation shaft high up on the wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The group looked up, calculating the climb. It's the only way, Malik said, his eyes scanning the group. We go up, crawl through, and get to the controls. The moment we do, we can take down the whole operation. The team worked quickly, finding crates and debris to help them scale the wall. It was a tight fit, but with each survivor working in unison, they made their way up into the vent system. The air was musty, and the scent of rot was thick in their noses. But they kept moving, crawling forward through the narrow passageways. Their progress was slow. Every turn felt like it could be their last, and every sound, the creak of a vent or the faintest echo, sent a ripple of anxiety through them. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of crawling through the dark, they reached a vent grate overlooking the central control room. Below them, they saw Klein's final preparations, the dark heart of the operation. The monitors flickered, displaying footage of cities across the world, all under siege. But they also saw something far worse, Klein's personal lab, where experiments were conducted on the undead. Malik's heart pounded. This was the key. This was where the end began. The control room below was a fortress. Metal walls, guarded by armed soldiers and automated defense systems, separated the survivors from their goal. Malik crouched low, watching through the vent grate as Klein's operation unfolded beneath him. His breath was shallow, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. Klein stood at the center of the room, issuing orders to his soldiers, his face bathed in the cold glow of multiple screens displaying cities in chaos. He was the mastermind, the puppeteer, and he was closer than ever to unleashing his army on the world. This ends now, Malik whispered under his breath. He motioned for the others to follow his lead. Elena and Toby nodded, already securing their weapons. The survivors had come this far. There was no turning back. Remember, Malik said, his voice low and steady. We take down Klein, then we shut everything down. No one leaves here alive unless they're on our side. The group moved quickly, squeezing through the tight vent and dropping down into the control room. The landing was soft, but the sound of their boots hitting the floor reverberated through the room. Klein's soldiers turned instantly, raising their weapons, but it was already too late. Malik lunged forward, his rifle blazing. Danny followed suit, taking down a soldier with a precise shot. Toby moved to the side, hacking into the terminal as he worked to override the security systems. Elena, ever the strategist, took out the guards near the back of the room, giving her team the opening they needed. "Get to Klein!" Malik shouted. Klein, now realizing the threat, turned his attention to the survivors. His cold, calculating smile disappeared as he drew a pistol from his waist. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered, aiming the gun at Malik. "You're too late. My army is already in motion. You'll never make it out alive." "I've heard that before," Malik replied, his voice calm. Without hesitation, he dove for cover behind a large server bank, narrowly avoiding Klein's shots. The room exploded into chaos as the survivors and Klein's forces clashed. Gunfire rang out, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics. The zombies outside, stirred by the sounds of the battle, began to press against the outer walls of the facility, their growls growing louder with each passing second. "This is it," Danny muttered, firing off shots with precision. "This is the final stand." Toby, who had managed to access a secondary terminal, finally shouted over the noise. "I'm in. I'm shutting it all down." But as he typed furiously, something unexpected happened. The lights flickered once again, and the monitors suddenly went black. A loud, ominous hum began to pulse through the room, followed by the screeching sound of metal twisting. "They've overridden my systems," Toby groaned. "Klein's got a failsafe. We're running out of time." Malik's eyes narrowed as Klein laughed from across the room. The general had retreated to a reinforced platform, raising his hand to signal something. His soldiers were retreating, falling back toward the exit as the room filled with the mechanical whine of the facility's security systems powering up. "You can't win," Klein taunted. "You're trapped in here with me." But as he spoke, the ground trembled beneath them. The sound of the zombies outside grew deafening, the building's structural integrity beginning to give way under the weight of the infected mass pushing against the walls. A massive explosion rocked the facility, sending a shockwave through the room. Malik's eyes locked onto the detonator Klein had triggered to set off the building's self-destruct sequence. They had no choice now, it was all or nothing. The timer on the device was ticking down, and the survivors had only moments before the entire facility would collapse into ruin. "Move!" Malik shouted, sprinting toward Klein's position. Danny and Elena followed, covering him with a barrage of gunfire. The remaining soldiers tried to stop them, but they were no match for the sheer determination of the survivors. Klein's eyes widened in disbelief as Malik reached the platform, slamming the general into the console. The detonator was just inches away from going off. But Malik was quicker. He grabbed Klein by the throat, lifting him off the ground with a fierce growl. "You lose," Malik said, his voice deadly calm. With a swift motion, he slammed the detonator into the control panel, shattering it. The countdown stopped, and the hum of the facility's destruction ceased. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, the floor began to shake. The walls buckled. The building was still collapsing, but the threat of immediate destruction had been averted. Klein, defeated, collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Toby, still at his terminal, began to work furiously. "I've got it. The shutdown sequence is in place. Everything's offline. The zombies won't be able to follow through with their mission. It's over." As the facility continued to crumble around them, the survivors turned toward the exit. The zombies, no longer under Klein's control, began to wander aimlessly. The survivors had won, against all odds, they had overcome the impossible. "Let's get out of here," Malik said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They rushed toward the exit, the ground shaking beneath their feet. They didn't stop until they had reached the safety of the surface, a world now free from Klein's twisted vision. And though their fight was over, they knew one thing for certain: the world they once knew would never be the same again. But they had survived, and in a world that had become a nightmare, survival was all that mattered.